This is when you can tell that a group is really coming together, when your guests are actually the speakers at your group. That could go either way, and I think that tonight is going to be a really, really great example. We've had Don Beezley here before. He was actually our very first speaker at our inaugural session back in May of last year, and he is back again. But following him up will be Tim Starr, and Tim Starr is back there in the teal shirt. He's the one that's always got a pistol on his hip. Can't miss him. And Tim came to me a few months ago and he wanted to talk about California and all of the mistakes that their legislature has made and wanted to make a speech of it. And then Don said, I would like to come and I would like to talk about Principles of Liberty, which is an organization that rates all of the bills of the Colorado State Legislature and also rates the legislators themselves based on a set of principles. And so he'll go through those sets of principles. We'll hear what the Colorado Legislature did, and then we will hear from Mr. Tim Starr about what happened in California. And you can, if he hasn't drawn the conclusions for you, then you're free to draw them yourselves. So without further ado, a former Colorado State Representative for House District 33, Mr. Don Beezley.
Can everyone hear me okay, or do I need to use this?
You need to use that.
Bummer. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, and it obviously is great to be back here, and I think Brian and Mike and everyone for just the job they do, how keeping Liberty of the Rocks going, and of course setting those initial embers, and it continues to burn. So Principles of Liberty is an organization started by Rich Bratton, and basically Rich said, look, there are some organizations out there that do rank different legislators and different pieces of legislation. But he said, you know what, I want to take that to a little bit different level and say, what are the principles that should lie behind the decisions that they make? And you know what, let's check out what legislators are actually adhering to some of those principles. And what comes out of that is a ranking scorecard. So, okay, yeah, if you would, go ahead and hit it. So I had mentioned Rich Bratton, and then myself, the reason I'm talking about it, there's kind of an advisory and an editorial board. We've written a couple of editorials about different pieces of legislation during the session, and then we also have actually some furious arguments from time to time, both on calls and emails, about given pieces of legislation and what the right principles are and what side of it we should be on. But former Senator Sean Mitchell is one of those, former Senator Tim Neville, and he's actually running for the Senate again now in SD16, and former Senator Dave Schulteis and myself. Go ahead, Brian. Come on, man, stay on the stick. All right. So the purpose of BOL, as I mentioned, is to evaluate legislators based on principles. And, it really is hard sometimes to get these principles into the minds of some legislators. And, it's interesting to try to figure out what does it actually take to get folks to think the right way. And I just want to share a quick story with you. One part of my life is I help folks sell businesses and value businesses and things like that. And one of the guys I had worked with several years ago was kind of a center-left Democrat. As you can imagine, we would spar from time to time. And he wasn't hardcore, but he was over there. And he ultimately bought a business. And actually, it was one that I was selling, that I was the broker for. And coincidentally, it actually used to be my father's business. I sold it to the third generation of ownership, which was kind of neat. That's a side story. But anyway, I'd stop in about once every year or two to see Mike and say, hey, how are things going, and how's the business and that kind of stuff. And the last time I stopped in, about a year ago, at the end of our conversation, kind of in honor of our past spars, he said, and Don, one other thing. I got to tell you, after 5 years of owning a business, I'm a lot more Republican than I used to be. So how do we get that? That's life experience. So these are truly the 8 principles that when Rich sits down primarily and then bounces it off the other folks in the group, he says, okay, for what are the principles that are at stake on this particular piece of legislation? It might be 1, it might be 8. Ultimately, he picked, I think it was 238 pieces of legislation that he did rank. I think it was 43,000 total data points. I'll show that in a sec here. But, personal responsibility. And actually, I do want to, before I go there, I do want to read, because I think Rich wrote this up really nice. The foundation of this course is individual liberty. What is individual liberty? The principle that individuals have an inalienable right to act in their own interest with complete control over themselves and their production, i.e. their property, and are the sole arbiters of what is best for themselves, so long as their actions do not infringe upon the liberty or property rights of others. The Bill of Rights is the original constitutional protection of our civil rights from an intrusive federal government. The same principles behind the Bill of Rights should apply at all levels of government, including the state. Individual liberty means freedom to make wise decisions, to make foolish decisions, to succeed, and to fail. And that's the foundation. I think that's well said. So thanks, Rich, for that. And then we apply these 8 principles to each piece of legislation. So where do the principles come from? And Rich loves pointing this out. Every single one of those principles that were just identified, because he wanted to go and he wanted to make it relevant to the party platforms that are out there and to the people that are actually, say they're part of those parties, that they embrace those principles and then apply them. And actually every single one of those are in both the Republican and Libertarian Party platforms, and 7 of 9 are in the Democratic platform. And of course, what underlies that, though, is we could have looked for those principles that say supported Marxist ideals, right? Obviously, we were looking to pull principles out of that are the ones that honor and protect human freedom. So that is the foundation. Those are the things. But we pulled it direct from party platforms. So our Republican legislators are saying all 8 of those that were on that other page are what motivates their decision making and their decision to be a part of that party. And this is how it broke down: 238 bills, 100 legislators, times committee votes and third votes. I think I skipped something in there, but it's 43,000 data points, 430 per legislature. And this is something that's interesting here, is every vote is equally weighted. And sometimes, and I think this comes up in a moment here, but sometimes a legislator will whine a little bit. Well, you're not weighting the votes. If I'm voting about some major eminent domain thing versus some procedural thing, maybe that should get more weight. I did the right thing here, maybe I did the wrong thing here. But what Rich's point of view within principle of liberty is, we're evaluating you based on your core integrity, based on your core adherence to these principles. We're not going to say one is somehow 40% important and another one is 60% important. Either you believe in these things and you apply them consistently with integrity, or you don't. And then a percentage and a grade score from F to A+ is given. I love this. And I just mentioned it's not fair, it's not weighted. And this is Rich's quote. I love it. 50% should be good is an argument a Republican legislator gave to him. And his response was, as you can see. And so what's the trend? 60%, and this is how he interprets the grades. And you'll see the grades here in a minute, but 60% is better than a monkey, but it could still be luck. But 70% really does imply some mastery of content. There really is a trend there. So there's a statistically significant trend that this person might be following a path. And less than 50% were clearly better off with the monkey with the coin. Literally. Okay. Can you click the 2012 House score?
2012?
Yeah. And I want to show you the 20, I don't know if you can see that. Can you take it up?
Yep.
It doesn't, we just need to see really the top 4 or 5 rows if we can, I don't know. Well, I'll interpret the information. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So first off, I feel like I should apologize because I'm number 4 on the list. I don't think I've been number 4 on very many, freedom lists. And all that really tells you is that as good as principles of liberty is, even they make mistakes. All right. So, but what I really want to show you here is I want you to remember number 1 here. At the time, Representative Randy Baumgartner. He serves in the Senate now. And what's his score over there? If you're off the screen, it's like 94, 95%. And I do want to point out, I was number 1 on the Colorado Union of Taxpayers list, taxpayer champion 2 years in a row. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had to redeem myself. That number 4, 94% or whatever. Well, he's like 94. So go ahead and now go switch back and pull up the 2013 Senate scorecard.
Okay.
All right. So during that 2012 session, and by the way, Randy just happened to give me some data points that make a really good example. All right, I'm not actually here to pick on Representative or Senator Baumgartner, but I think it's important to understand as we think about who are we voting for, why are we voting for them, what do they stand for, what are they going to do when they get there. Let's just keep going down until we get to Randy in 2013. Come on.
I'm trying, man.
Okay. And keep going down a little more, just see who's right after that. Okay. All right. So during 2012, he was running for the state senate. And in his state senate district, he wanted to have those votes and that score and that voting pattern. Well, now he knew he was going to be trying to run for the United States Senate. And he made some decisions about his votes around that and what kind of pattern he wanted out there, what kind of reputation he wanted to have. And so that particular individual, and we could look at anyone, he just happened to be number one the prior year, so he gets the acclaim. You know, and it really, it should cause us to think about, you know, what are these folks saying? What are they really doing? How are we going to hold them accountable? Because the fact is, if we're just playing a political game, if that's all it is, and that is all it is to some folks, if we aren't founded and rooted in meaningful principles, we don't understand what we believe and why we believe them, then this is what happens, right? It's just a sellout. This is what happens, and then what do we get? Do we get, you know, from a political perspective, right, in terms of a brand, in terms of people think, well, what does being a Republican stand for? Did this kind of thing strengthen that brand? Or does it maybe have a little bit of a derogatory effect on that brand? I'm going to suggest it has a derogatory effect. You know, if Coke puts a certain brand out in a certain flavor and you go buy the next can and it tastes like garbage compared to what you thought it was going to be, you're not going to be as big of a Coke fan, would be my guess. And I think Republicans struggle with this all the time. There's so much Me Too Democratism going on that at the end of the day just erodes us and makes us sound like, number one, we don't have integrity. And then also we get into these situations where we're so afraid to defend what we believe in. You know, I look at the last presidential election and, you know, and Mitt Romney. Talk about a guy that should have said, hey, you know what, I am successful. Here's why I'm successful. Here's what I did. And here's why I want this to be the kind of place that people can succeed in. What a wonderful message. But instead he kind of weaved and bobbed and hid from it and never really stood for anything. Didn't defend the system that allowed him to achieve the phenomenal wealth that he had achieved and all the good that he had created. The companies he had turned around, the jobs those companies had created. An incredible story. He was scared to death of it. Didn't tell it. And guess what? He's not president and somebody else is. So let's go to the 2013. Go to the 2013 House.
Oh, is that the middle?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, it's kind of the same story here, that, you know, and I think really the point I want to make to you at this point in time is that, number one, I want you to know that principlesofliberty.org exists, all right? This is a great, and in fact, it's probably the only one. You can get great litmus tests out of other one, including the Colorado Union of Taxpayers. They're a little better ranking the number one person than Principles of Liberty is. But this is, I think, fundamentally, and I also know Rich, and Rich is a very principled individual. He cares about these issues and ideas, and he doesn't do it with a distorted slant. He looks at it and says, you know, what does this mean? How does this apply to Bill X? What is actually in that bill, and is it meaningful? Is it substantive? Is it something that actually reflects who and what this person is and what they believe? And let's go ahead now and go to the next.
What's scary is the average scores. Yeah. So that's what's very scary.
It is, and I talk about that a little bit here. Go ahead to the next. So analysis and conclusion. Number one, this data, what it really does, is it perfect necessarily? No, but boy, it helps identify trends. And I encourage you to go look this up, you know, and take a look down. And you can see who ranks where, and it's consistent for the most part. You know, Randy's actually an anomaly. Because the truth is, somebody like a Representative Joe Rose, she's going to be at 50% year after year after year.
Well, that's...
I'm generous. This is also pretty interesting, and you know, Dem voting patterns, I mean, they are locked in. They're in like a 10-point range from like 7% to 15% in these rankings. They're doing what they are told to do. The one thing that, that's sort of refreshing on the Republican side is there is some diversity, at least in that sense, is not command and control, but unfortunately the diversity comes out of weakness rather than strength, whereas their unity comes out of weakness instead of strength. Should be the other way around. We should be loud and proud about what we stand for, about these principles that Rich has identified. This is also interesting too. You know, Senate leadership was actually all in the top 26% of senators this past session. House leadership, only one was in the top third of Republicans.
And even that's surprising.
Yeah, and that was skin of her teeth. So the other thing too is to understand relative positions. You know, you can draw your own conclusions about, hey, you've got to deal with the political jungle. You're trying to think about that next election. How do you do the right thing? How does that translate? What fights are worth it? Those are reasonable questions, I guess, and you can look at people's relative positions to try to figure out, you know, do I believe in this person? And the other part of this I think that matters too, and here 5 of the top 6 are freshmen. Send reinforcements, that's Richo's message. One thing I do want to share with you is a little bit does make a big difference. When we are looking at who are we actually going to elect, who is at the margin, the amount of impact that a couple $100 makes for somebody is beyond belief. And we don't have that automatic union built-in base and all those folks that are going out getting paid to do stuff. Whether it's getting paid to scare people away from the polls, right? Getting paid to scare people from participating in the recall elections, those kind of things. We don't have those resources. So do think about that as you're making decisions. You know, that extra $200 that a small business person gives to a candidate or something like that can make a difference at these levels. But let's go back at these and look. And you get back to the old argument that the worst Republican is better than the best Democrat. And I guess you could look at this last session, right, and say, well, yeah, that's kind of true. But boy, I want to see more principled leadership. I want to see a brand that means something. I want to see consistency and courage and a desire to express these ideas and these ideals in a way that's powerful. And they are powerful. Doing the right thing for the right reason is a powerful thing, and our ideas actually work in reality. So also look for those folks that are actually not afraid to say those things, but are also willing to say those things in an intelligent way, a way that's meaningful for folks, a way that connects with folks, because that's the next piece. Go ahead to the next. So the real conclusion, expect more and demand more, as I was just talking about, smarter Republican Party, better principles, better messages, and better messengers. Folks in here that are active and they're trying to hold folks accountable, absolutely the kind of folks that can say, you know what, why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? And just a couple little tidbits. If you're emailing your legislators on the conservative side, email them with courtesy. They'll read those. Say, hey, you know what, I'm constituent. I'm really worried about this. I want you to do this or that. They do listen to that. And that's my one little kind of action item I'll share with you. But mostly, I want to introduce you to the fact that principles of liberty exist. Number 2, that the scoring criteria is the best that is out there that I have seen. And number 3, use it. Use it to inform yourself about what these folks are doing. And frankly, to let them know that you know what they're doing and that you're pretty disappointed in it, or that you, or do this too, guys. Thank them sometimes. When they do the right things, you know, go to whoever the top guys, go to the principlesofliberty.org, find the top couple of guys, send them an email and say, hey, you know what, I just saw your ranking on principlesofliberty.org. Thank you so much for standing up for the right ideas. I really appreciate it. Because believe me, you get a lot of the other emails, you don't always get a lot of those. That's powerful. Yeah. Questions okay, Mike? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I disagree with one of your conclusions.
Sure.
We don't need better principles. We need to actually apply the principles that are already there in the Republican Party platform, but people don't seem to even know what the Republican Party platform is anymore.
Fair enough.
Just about.
Remember the right principles.
Yes. John?
But that didn't align with my better.
Is there a similar type of thing that the Democrats do? A ranking?
Ranking-wise, you know, that's an important question that we should actually know, and I don't know.
Principles of communism.
The closest things they have are the Colorado Conservation Voters and the ACLU rankings.
And I would like to report I was the lowest ranked legislator on those. AFL-CIO, and yeah, actually on all of them. Other questions? Yeah.
During the legislative session, you hear Rich Bratton on Grassroots Radio, usually about 5:15.
Yeah, Rich Bratton every Monday during the legislative session on Grassroots Radio at 5:15, going through the exact things that add up to these rankings. Any others?
No one else has anything else.
Please.
I happened to actually be with Rich Bratton this morning, and so overheard a conversation with him and someone else, and I won't tell you who else, but I will mention that he called him a which is like calling him a 4-letter word if you're familiar with him from Facebook. But they were talking about objective versus subjective, and one thing that I've learned from politics, being in it as long as I have, is every other entity rates things so subjectively. Even Cut, which I absolutely love, is a little bit subjective. They go a little softer on Republicans during election years, and a little harder on Democrats during election years. This is not that way. This is as objective as it possibly gets, because we're talking about principles and not the application of the principles. We can all agree on the principles, but like Rich was saying this morning, you can sometimes disagree on how those are applied, but if you're still holding a principle, just in a different application, they still get scored well. And part of the reason he doesn't weight things is because then it becomes subjective. And so, as Don was saying, this is the most objective, this is the most fair thing that I've seen as far as ranking systems go in any scorecard in the last 15 years.
And the most comprehensive, I think, in terms of the volume of data. What else? Somebody ask me a hard question.
Are you gonna run for Senate in 2014?
You mean state and primary Vicky, or?
No, I mean United States Congress. United States.
I get that question a lot.
Hang on, a question back.
Welcome back to
Hey, I was looking on there, you said that you were demanding, I was wondering, are you demanding people get involved in politics more? Or are you demanding people not get involved in government's game and government's, people are not involved in government's game, like back off and be the concept of their authorities, because when their powers, when people realize the government's power, they simply do not get the concept and their power will be well or slip into a point. That way, that way people will involve less in politics and focus more on property and the people's lives.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I know how to put that into a question, but I think, the bottom line, as far as demanding more, I mean, it is demand more of the folks that represent us. It is hold them accountable, but hold them out and accountable in a way that's positive. Because I will say, some of the things I see, I mean, there are times when you know what, you need to wave that Gadsden flag. You need to go and do those things. But in the day-to-day, it really is saying, hey, Representative, Smith, I really am concerned that you voted this way because I think this is the principle that we should represent, and this is what I saw. I mean, those kind of constructive feedback. The other piece is to demand more of ourselves. I mean, I think, Steve and I have talked about this a little bit. One of the inherent disadvantages I actually think we have politically with the liberal left is that being a political warrior is an inherent part of their philosophy. Right? I mean, they get out of college, they can't wait to work for free to lord power over other people and tell them how to run their lives. Whereas for us, we get out of school wanting to work hard, build a business, have a great family, be good people, good communities. We want to live there. And for us to think, gosh, we've got to pick up this political thing and go do it, it's like this extra thing we got to do. But for them, it's part and parcel of that kind of fascist gene. And I don't use that totally pejoratively. I mean, a little bit, but it really is kind of that.
I'd say fascism is always pejorative. It should be anyway.
Yeah, perhaps. So I've actually sketched out an article called The Fascist Gene, because there is kind of this intent desire. Because I have all sorts of opinions about how everybody should live their lives. And I'd be happy to send you a letter with 150 recommendations for how you do things. But it never occurs to me to go hire third-party thugs to make you do it. That's a totally different mentality. Dave.
Do you have any recommendation or insight into what to suggest to either the local or state leadership of the Republican Party that when they're faced with two candidates for the same office, one they think that can win but is unprincipled, and the other that is principled but would be much more difficult to win? What advice would you give to those leaders in said party in terms of their tactics and such a thing?
Well, I think it's both strategic and tactical, and I touched on a piece of that earlier, in that you do have to build brand, and you have to have that brand consist of some sort of substance that you continuously deliver on. Because then that principled person actually becomes a part of a more powerful brand that you can proffer forth. Because the truth is that any political party's kind of functional purpose is one thing. It's to get people elected. And that's it. And the question becomes, do you care what kind of people you get elected or not? And I would suggest that we don't spend enough time caring within a Republican organization, and there's multiple levels of the organization, caring enough about what kind of people we elect, how we then communicate that brand. And there's a schism between, you've got the national party that is very much that kind of, I'll say, liberal elite in a sense, that wants to lock in their situation regardless of the outcomes. And you have a taste of that at the state level because they get badgered by the national level. And then you have the rogues at the county level that are a little bit better, right? I mean, Broomfield County under Eric was incredible, and now Rick's trying to carry that on. Boulder County is actually coming around. You've got Adams County that's kind of rebelled. But then still, you don't always get that most principled visionary, strategic visionary, even at the state level, coming out of those county levels. And I think that comes back to involvement, right? You have that slim core of folks that stay dedicated and committed over a long period of time that end up in those leadership positions, and then they're either don't care to deliver on that brand or build that brand, or they're afraid to deliver on it, or some combination of the two. I just believe you build a brand based on these principles, and then you share it with people. And that's part of it. You don't poke people in the chest saying, you're going to hell, right? And which is kind of the general brand of the Republican Party to some degree, especially among younger people. You're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. The other guys are selling hope. In general, people want more hope in their lives than time in hell. So, at the margin, guess what? The other guys are winning. And that's a powerful and important message. We actually have real hope. They're selling false hope and destructive change. We're scared to death to sell real hope, which is freedom and opportunity and how people can build amazing lives for themselves. And we need to talk about that and talk about it and talk about it and not be afraid of it.
Does anyone else have a question besides Matt? Okay, we'll do Matt and then we'll move on to Tim.
Great.
Please comment on that theme and the question, because do you believe, as I do, that, I mean, yes, parties are about winning elections, but you have to look to more than just the election that's right in front of you. And there's sort of a meta strategy in the branding. Yeah, you might sell more six-packs of Coke if you change the formula and cheap skimp on the ingredients and put out bilge, because I mean, hell, you can just go down anywhere and grab bilge and put it in a can, and you might sell more at cut rate prices that first sale, but long term you'll lose. And if we continue to allow the sellouts in our so-called leadership to tarnish our brand and destroy that, then over the long haul, not only do we not win elections, but we fail to advance the agenda or the policy that we care about. And that to me, the question then is, what constitutes winning? Is winning just getting a slight majority of people that are willing to hang the right letter behind their name into public office? Or is winning getting people in there that are willing to advance our principles and our policies in the public arena?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the long-term strategy versus the short-term outlook. And is it better to actually have the right brand, the right principles, cultivate the right people to pursue those, but do it in an intelligent way so you can build that brand and get them elected over the course of, say, the next 10 years. And I think there does need to be that 10-year vision that's based on that idea, and then figuring out how do you rebuild a little bit in the short term as well without compromising that long-term vision. Instead, we just ignore that long-term vision completely as a party for the most part and focus on the here and now. And unfortunately now, by doing that over the last 20 years, we put ourselves in a jam where we feel that every day is an emergency, right? I mean, we are so far behind the curve, and the other side has their foot on our throat in so many ways that now we feel this great sense of urgency that we feel like we have to constantly do nothing but short-term strategies just to stop the garbage. I mean, even look at the state of Colorado, right? We stopped it for 2 years with 33 votes in one chamber, and now look what happens when we don't have that. So that becomes that pragmatic thing, right? I mean, the worst Republican is better than best Democrat, but how do we stop having worse Republicans? And I think it's a blend of short-term intelligence with a long-term strategy, and I don't think that vision exists at either the state or the national level right now for the party. All right, well, thank you so much, and please check out Principles.